Hi guys, and welcome back to the channel. So in this video I'm going to show you how I made this rustic looking storage box on wheels. So on a recent video I gave a general makeover to one of my cupboards and I decided to add a storage box at the bottom. So now I'm just measuring up the size ready to make the box. And I decided to use pallet wood for this project. So after removing some nails and breaking up a few pallets, I decided on a pallet that had quite interesting grain pattern. For the four corner supports of the box, I'm going to use this old pine drawer front. So I started off by ripping down these corner supports on the table saw, and I decided to go 2 centimeters by 2 centimeters. So they're quite thin, but that will give me maximum space inside the box. Once I'd cut them down, I cut each side to square them up to make sure they're exactly 2 by 2. Then I gave one corner a round over, and that will be the corner on the inside of the box, just so that it's nice and smooth when you're putting stuff inside the box. Luckily these pieces were fairly straight, so I wouldn't need to cut too much off of them. I then adjusted my table saw ready to cut down the pallet wood, and I cut a slither off both ends or both sides just to make sure that they're all the same width. So now it was time to measure up all of the pieces to make all of the sides. For the front and back I went with 44 centimeters. And for the sides I went with 40 centimeters, and when that's all put together it will give me a roughly square box. I then cut down all the pieces on the miter saw. And once I'd cut the first piece, I used that as a template for the other pieces. You could use a stop block here, but I prefer to do it this way. And then I just laid out all the pieces ready for assembly. So now I needed to measure up for the four corner supports, and they're going to be about 2 centimeters shorter than the depth of the box, and that is so that I can recess the base into the box, and you'll see how that goes later on. I did the same with these corner supports, using the first one as a template for the rest. I then just rounded over the tops, just to make them look a little bit more finished when they're inside the box. It was then time to start gluing up. So for the sides I decided to use some headless nails. and I use the combination square just to mark a line so that I know where the center of these supports are, ready for the nails. And here I just took my time and kept checking to make sure that everything was square with the speed square. Now I needed to find the center again for when I add the rest of the pieces on, and I transferred that mark to the rest of the pieces. Then I could mark up where the screws were going to go. I just used a couple of clamps to help me to keep the sides upright while I added the front and the back. And I drilled pilot holes ready for the screws. And countersunk the holes. Again, I added plenty of glue. And just spread it out with an old paintbrush. I decided to use screws here because it's just much easier to add them at this stage rather than hammering nails in. And again, just checking with the speed square to make sure everything is nice and square. The same for the back panel, plenty of glue. And then I added a clamp here because some of the wood was a little bit warped, so I just needed to persuade it into position before screwing it down. I added an extra screw at the bottom corner of each panel as well. And then once that was done, I just checked it again with the square and it looked good. So for the bottom, I decided to use this 18mm plywood, and this was actually originally in the cupboard being used as a shelf, so I'm recycling it and it's going back into another cupboard project. I'm just using the box here as a template to draw around. Then I used my jigsaw to cut the shape out. And I was happy because it fit first time. That doesn't usually happen, so that was good. To make the box really strong, I decided to add glue around all the sides of the base. And then I wanted to add a screw in the center of each side to really tie everything together and make it really strong. So I found the center, drilled a pilot hole and countersunk the hole, and then added the screw. Now I went ahead with the trim router and just rounded over all of the square edges. And on the inside too. And this will just prevent any splintering later on. So there was quite a few holes left by the nails of these pallets, so I quickly just mixed some sawdust up with some wood glue to make a filler. I don't mind the odd hole, but some of these were quite big, so I just filled the majority of the big holes. When that was dry, I went over it with a belt sander with a 60 grit paper. And then with my detail sander, I went over it again with a 120 grit. And for any imperfections and jutting out parts, I just went over it with a Stanley blade and just shaved off those sharp edges. Then I gave it a hand sanding to finish it off. Then I just brushed off all the dust. For the wheels, I have these casters that I found on an old cabinet. So I'm going to recycle those and just use these small screws to fix them. Luckily with the thick ply base, it's nice and easy to just screw these straight into the base without it coming through the bottom. And I just added a caster into each corner. Now for the finish, I used some boiled linseed oil, and this really brought out the grain and the colour in this wood. I think it's a pine, but I'm not 100% sure. It's got lots of marks on it and burnt areas where saw blades have cut through it. So it looks really old and rustic, which I think looks good. So then I just used a cloth to buff off the excess oil once it had time to soak in. And I wanted to add these lever handles. So I made up a quick jig to get the bend consistent. I found out where the centre was and then offered up the little jig that I'd made. Then I could drill 2 pilot holes ready for the fixings. These were just fixed with some Allen key bolts. I chose grey because I thought it would match the decor of the room, which is also grey. And that was the box, all done. So that's about it for this video. I was really pleased with how it turned out in the end. It did take a little longer than expected using really rough pallet wood, but it turned out okay in the end, and the oil brought out some really nice colours in the wood, and it's great for what I need it for. So if you found this video useful, please remember to like and also consider subscribing for more DIY related videos. And as always, thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.